On the day she graduated, Ella walked across the stage with a calm smile, her heart quietly hoping someone would be there for her. She had worked for years, paying her own fees, studying late nights and never asking for help. As she looked into the crowd, her eyes searched again and again, but the seats where her parents should have been were empty. She told herself, maybe they are late, maybe they are parking. But deep down she already knew the truth. When the ceremony ended, people hugged their families, took pictures and laughed loudly. Ella stood alone, holding her certificate, whispering to herself, "It's okay. I made it." When Ella got home, she still had her graduation gown on, hoping maybe something would surprise her. As she stepped into the house, it was quiet, too quiet, like no one had been waiting. Then she heard music and laughter coming from the backyard, and her heart lifted for a second. Did they plan something for me? She thought, walking slowly toward the kitchen. But on the counter there was only a small note written by her mother. "Food is in the fridge. Your sister had something important today. Congrats." Ella read it twice, then smiled weakly and said, "Of course," her again. She opened the fridge and saw cold food left behind, nothing special, nothing prepared for her. Sitting alone at the table, still wearing her cap and gown, she ate quietly while the sound of laughter filled the air outside. Her sister, Chloe, was being celebrated for becoming a club vice president, and everyone was cheering her name. Ella paused while chewing and stared at the wall, feeling something inside her slowly fade. "So this is how it is," she whispered softly. She didn't cry, she didn't get angry, she just felt empty. That night she went to her room and sat in silence for a very long time. The next morning, Ella woke up early before anyone else in the house. She packed a small bag with only the things that mattered to her: her laptop, a few clothes, and a picture of her late grandmother. As she zipped her bag, she looked around her room and said quietly, "I'm done waiting." There was no note left behind this time, no explanation, no goodbye. She walked out of the house just like she had lived in it, unnoticed. As she drove away, she didn't look back once. For the first time in her life, she chose herself. Ella moved into a small apartment in the city. Nothing fancy, just enough space to start over. She had already secured a job at a financial firm, and she threw herself into work with full focus. Her boss, Mr. Carter, noticed her effort one day and said, "You're different. You don't complain, you just deliver." Ella smiled slightly and replied, "I've learned to build things on my own." Days turned into weeks and slowly her life began to change. She learned to cook, to manage her time, and to enjoy her own company. And for the first time, the silence around her didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. It took 2 full days before anyone in the house noticed Ella was gone. 2 days passed before her mother finally sent a message. Not even a call, just a simple text. "Where are you? Your sister needs your charger." Ella stared at the message for a long time, her fingers hovering over the screen. She let out a quiet laugh and said, "Of course. Not even 'Are you okay?'" After a moment she typed back, "I moved out. She can keep the charger." Then she turned off her phone and placed it face down. For the first time she chose not to respond to neglect with effort. The calls started the next day, one after the other, but Ella ignored them all. Later she listened to one voicemail from her father, his voice calm and slightly confused. "El, your mom said you left. That's unexpected. Call us back when you can." There was no urgency, no concern, just inconvenience in his tone. Ella shook her head and whispered, "You still don't see me." She deleted the message and moved on with her day. Work became her focus, her safe place, where effort actually meant something. Numbers, reports, and deadlines didn't ignore her, they responded to her. One evening after work, Ella stopped at a small cafe near her apartment. The barista, a cheerful woman named Lily, smiled and said, "You look like someone who needs something strong today." Ella smiled back slightly and replied, "You have no idea." Over time, that cafe became her quiet escape, a place where someone remembered her name and order. It was a small thing, but to Ella, it felt like something she had never truly experienced before. Recognition. One day Lily said, "You're always so focused. What do you do?" Ella paused and said, "I'm building my life." At work, her performance began to stand out quickly. Her boss, Mr. Carter, started giving her more responsibility, trusting her with bigger tasks. One afternoon he walked past her desk and dropped a file saying, "I want you to handle this client. Don't disappoint me." Ella looked up surprised and replied, I won't. She stayed late that night, carefully reviewing every detail, determined to prove herself. When the client responded positively the next day, Mr. Carter nodded and said, I knew you had it. That simple acknowledgement stayed with her longer than he could ever imagine. As months passed, Ella's life began to take shape in ways she had never imagined. She upgraded her small apartment, bought better furniture, and slowly created a space that truly felt like hers. One evening, sitting by her window, she whispered, I did this, all by myself. The loneliness that once felt heavy had transformed into something lighter, something peaceful. She wasn't waiting for approval anymore, she wasn't trying to be seen. She was becoming someone she was proud of. And without realizing it, she had already started building a life no one could ignore. About 3 months into her new life, Ella came home one evening and noticed a familiar car parked outside her apartment. Her steps slowed immediately and her heart sank slightly as she recognized it. Sitting inside was her mother, waiting patiently like she had all the time in the world. So now you remember I exist, Ella muttered under her breath as she approached. Her mother stepped out quickly and said, Ella, there you are. They hugged briefly, but the warmth didn't last. Before Ella could even speak, her mother added, Your sister's birthday is coming up. She really wants you there. Ella blinked slowly, letting the words settle before responding. That's why you came? She asked quietly, her voice steady but heavy. Her mother hesitated, then said, Well, family is important, Ella. Ella gave a small nod and replied, I'll think about it. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, just repeated, I'll think about it. Her mother tried to continue, mentioning how Chloe would feel if she didn't come, but Ella stayed calm. I said I'll think about it, Mom. The conversation ended there and her mother left shortly after, clearly unsettled. When Ella entered her apartment, she sat down and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Nothing has changed, she whispered to herself. That visit confirmed everything she already knew. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what happened on her graduation day, just another request centered around her sister. Something inside her hardened, not in anger but in clarity. I'm not going back just to be invisible again, she said firmly. That night she made a decision that felt both heavy and freeing at the same time. She would not attend the birthday party. The weeks that followed were some of the quietest moments of her life. There were nights when the silence felt overwhelming, when she questioned if she had made the right choice. Maybe I'm being too harsh, she thought once, sitting alone with her thoughts. But each time she remembered the empty seats at her graduation, the note on the counter and the cold meal, her doubts faded. No. I'm choosing myself, she reassured herself. She continued to focus on work, growing stronger emotionally and mentally with each passing day. One afternoon, while working late, Mr. Carter stopped by her desk and placed a business card in front of her. Call this man, he said briefly before walking away. Ella picked up the card and read the name Mr. Harrison Cole, a well-known financial advisor. Curious but confident, she made the call the next morning. After a short conversation, she was invited for an interview. Days later, she walked out with a new offer, a better position, better pay, and a bigger opportunity. As she stepped outside, she smiled and said softly, This is just the beginning. Ella stepped into her new office with a quiet confidence that surprised even her. The space was bigger, brighter, and filled with people who carried themselves with purpose. On her first day, Mr. Harrison Cole greeted her with a firm handshake and said, I don't hire potential, I hire results. Show me what you can do. Ella met his gaze and replied calmly, You won't regret this. It wasn't arrogance, it was certainty built from everything she had endured. As she settled into her desk, she whispered to herself, No one is overlooking me here. The workload was intense, far more demanding than her previous job, but Ella didn't complain. She stayed focused, learning quickly, observing how decisions were made and adapting with precision. One evening, Mr. Cole stopped by and said, You're handling pressure better than most people, twice your experience. Ella smiled slightly and replied, Pressure is something I'm used to. He studied her for a moment and nodded as if he understood more than she had said. That small recognition pushed her even further. She wasn't just working anymore, she was rising. Around that same time, Ella began visiting her favorite cafe more often. One afternoon, Lily introduced her to someone new. Oh, this is Ryan. He works in the building next door, she said casually. Ryan smiled and said, I've seen you here a few times. You always look like you're solving something important. Ella laughed softly and replied, maybe I am. Their conversations started small, simple greetings that slowly turned into longer talks. There was something easy about him, something that didn't demand attention but offered it naturally. Over the next few weeks, Ella and Ryan grew closer without forcing it. They talked about work, life, and the little things most people overlook. One evening, as they sat with their coffee, Ryan asked gently, you always seem strong, but what made you that way? Ella paused, thinking carefully before answering. I didn't have a choice, she said quietly. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix anything, he just listened. And in that moment, Ella felt something unfamiliar but comforting. She felt seen. 6 months into her new job, Ella's growth became impossible to ignore. She was handling major clients, making decisions that impacted real money and earning respect across the firm. One day, during a team meeting, Mr. Cole said, Ella, take the lead on this project. The room went quiet for a second, then all eyes turned to her. She nodded confidently and said, all right, let's get started. As the meeting continued, she realized something powerful. She was no longer the girl waiting to be noticed. She had become the woman people relied on. About 9 months after Ella left home, her phone rang with a name she hadn't seen in a long time. Chloe. Ella stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello, she said calmly. On the other end, Chloe's voice sounded different, softer, almost unsure. Oh, I need to talk to you. And I need you to really listen. Ella leaned back in her chair and replied, I'm listening. There was a long pause before Chloe spoke again, as if she was choosing her words carefully. Things at home, they're not the same since you left, Chloe said quietly. Ella didn't respond immediately, she just listened. Chloe continued, Mom and Dad argue more now. Dad barely talks and Mom, she's just different. Ella closed her eyes briefly, taking it all in. And, she asked gently. Chloe hesitated before saying, I think they finally noticed what they did, or didn't do. That sentence hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ella sighed softly and said, it took me leaving for that to happen. Chloe's voice trembled slightly as she continued. I knew they treated you differently. I always knew, she admitted. Ella's grip tightened on her phone, but she stayed calm. Then why didn't you say anything? She asked, not in anger but in truth. Chloe answered honestly, because I was afraid. If I spoke up, I might lose everything they were giving me. Ella was silent for a moment, then said softly, you were a kid too. There was no blame in her voice, just quiet understanding. I'm sorry, Ella, Chloe said, her voice breaking. I should have done something. Ella looked out her window and replied, we can't change what's already happened. Then she added, but I'm not ready to come back and pretend everything is okay. Chloe nodded, even though Ella couldn't see her. I understand, she said. I didn't want you to think I never cared. Ella softened slightly and replied, I know you did, in your own way. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a step. After the call ended, Ella sat quietly thinking about everything Chloe had said. That conversation stayed with her not because it fixed anything but because it confirmed what she had always felt. I wasn't imagining it, she whispered to herself. Later that evening she met Ryan at the cafe and he noticed something on her mind. You look like you've been somewhere far away, he said gently. Ella smiled faintly and replied, just revisiting the past. He nodded and said, well, you don't live there anymore. And for the first time she truly believed that. As time moved forward, Ella's life continued to rise in ways she once thought were impossible. Her confidence grew stronger, her decisions sharper, and her presence more commanding. At work, people began to seek her opinion before making major moves. One afternoon, Mr. Cole called her into his office and said, you're not just doing well, you're leading without trying. Ella smiled slightly and replied, I'm just doing what needs to be done. He leaned back and added, that's exactly why you're different. That moment stayed with her longer than she expected. Outside of work, her connection with Ryan deepened naturally. There were no rushed expectations, no pressure, just steady understanding. One evening, as they walked through the city, Ryan said, you've built something solid, you know that? Ella looked ahead and replied, I had to, no one else was going to do it for me. He nodded, respecting the weight behind her words. Then he added gently, I'm glad you didn't let what they did define you. Ella paused for a second and said, "It shaped me, but it didn't break me." At the 1-year mark after her graduation, Ella received a voicemail from her father. She saw the notification and stared at it for a long time without pressing play. Her heart didn't race, her hands didn't shake, she just felt calm. "What could you possibly say now?" she whispered softly. She placed the phone down and walked away from it. That message stayed unheard, sitting quietly in her phone like a piece of the past she wasn't ready to revisit. And for the first time she realized she didn't need closure to move forward. A few weeks later, Chloe called again, but this time her voice carried urgency. "Ella, something happened," she said quickly. Ella sat down immediately and asked, "What is it?" Chloe took a breath before saying, "Dad lost his job." Silence filled the line for a moment as Ella processed the words. "When?" she asked calmly. 3 weeks ago," Chloe replied. Ella frowned slightly and said, "And he didn't tell anyone?" Chloe shook her head on the other side and said, "No. Mom just found out." After the call ended, Ella sat quietly, reflecting on everything she had just heard. Her father, the man who had always seemed distant and untouchable, was now struggling in silence. "That must be hard," she admitted softly, not out of sympathy alone but understanding. Later that evening she told Ryan everything and he listened carefully before asking, "What do you want to do?" Ella thought for a moment and replied, "I don't know yet, but I'm not rushing into anything." This time she would make her decision on her own terms. Over the next few days, Ella thought deeply about the situation, weighing her emotions against her growth. She sat by her window one evening and said quietly, "I don't owe them, but I don't want to become cold either." It wasn't about revenge, it was about who she had become. She remembered the nights she struggled alone, the silence, the neglect, and how she built herself anyway. "If I help, it will be my choice, not my obligation," she decided. That clarity gave her peace. She wasn't the same girl who left that house anymore. The next morning, Ella called Chloe first. "I'm coming home," she said calmly. Chloe paused in surprise and asked, "Really?" Ella nodded even though she couldn't see her. "Yes, but things are different now," she added. "I'm not coming back to be ignored or treated like before." Chloe quickly replied, "I understand, I promise." Ella took a breath and said, "I'm coming as someone who has something to say and they need to listen." Chloe's voice softened as she said, "They will. They have to." That weekend, Ella drove back to the house she once left behind, but this time she wasn't the same person walking in. Ryan sat beside her, calm and supportive, his hand resting gently over hers. As they pulled into the driveway, Ella noticed how different everything looked. The house felt smaller, quieter, almost worn out by time. "It doesn't feel the same," she said softly. Ryan squeezed her hand and replied, "Because you're not the same." She nodded slowly, gathering herself before stepping out of the car. When Ella knocked on the door, her mother opened it and froze for a moment. "Ella," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. They hugged, but it wasn't the same as before, it was careful, almost uncertain. Inside, her father stood up slowly, his face showing the weight of everything he had been carrying. "Ella," he said quietly. She looked at him and replied, "Dad." There was no hug, just a long pause between them. Years of silence sat in that space, waiting to be addressed. They all sat in the living room, but no one said what truly mattered at first. Her mother offered drinks, her father spoke about nothing important, and the room felt familiar in the worst way. Ella looked around and said calmly, "I didn't come here for small talk." The room went silent immediately. She took a deep breath and continued, "I came because I heard what happened, and I want to help." Then she paused and added, "But before that, there are things you need to hear." And for the first time everyone listened. Ella sat upright, her voice calm but firm as she began to speak. "On my graduation day I walked across that stage alone," she said, looking directly at her parents. Her mother's eyes immediately filled with tears, but Ella didn't stop. "I worked for years, paid my way and hoped, just once, you would show up for me." Her father lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Ella continued, "But instead, you were outside celebrating Chloe." The room fell into a deep silence as her words settled heavily over everyone present. "When I came home I found a note," Ella continued, her voice steady but filled with truth. "It said food was in the fridge. That was it." Her mother covered her mouth, tears falling freely now. I sat there in my graduation gown, eating alone, while I could hear all of you laughing outside. Her voice softened slightly, but it didn't break. That wasn't the first time I felt invisible. It was just the last. Chloe looked down, quietly crying, while her father remained still, absorbing every word without interruption. I'm not saying you didn't love me, Ella said after a short pause. I'm saying you didn't see me. Her words were simple, but they carried years of weight behind them. Her father finally spoke, his voice low and shaken. Oh, I didn't realize it was that bad. Ella nodded slowly and replied, exactly, you didn't realize. Her mother stepped forward, tears in her voice as she said, I'm so sorry, Ella. I truly am. But this time, Ella didn't rush to comfort her. She had spent too many years doing that already. Ella took a deep breath before continuing, her tone shifting slightly. I've built something for myself, she said calmly. I have a career, a life, and people who see me for who I am. She paused and added, I'm willing to help, not because I owe you but because that's who I choose to be. Her father looked up, surprised, and asked, help? How? Ella replied, I can support the mortgage for now and connect you with people who can help you get back on your feet. Then she added firmly, but this doesn't erase the past. They talked for a long time after that, not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. There were no sudden fixes, no dramatic hugs that solved everything, just truth finally being spoken out loud. Before leaving, her father walked her to the door and said quietly, I'm proud of you. I just wish I said it sooner. Ella looked at him and replied, then say it now, and mean it. As she drove away with Ryan, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not sadness, but lightness. She had faced her past without losing herself, and more importantly, she had built a life that no one could ever ignore again.